We have the mitzvah of honoring parents. The Torah tells us in the fifth commandment, honor your father and your mother. Now we ask a question. We have the concept of mitzvat aseh, a positive commandment, which is honoring parents. And we have, on the other hand, prohibitions. For example, the Torah tells us to observe Shabbat. And the Torah via negativa tells us that if someone does something on Shabbat, he's going to be punished. It's in violation of Torah laws. What the person needs to do, if his or her father or mother ask them to violate Shabbat. So we explain that since God said, you and your parents are obligated to my honor, meaning God, that override, that supersede the other part. Now, we are on page 6, the top of the page. Lav dimchamer, which means, since we talk about the father who said to his son, slaughter for me, bake for me, etc. So we answered and we said there are an exception, meaning you have one concept which is mitzvat aseh, a positive commandment, that it sometimes override negative commandment, lo ta'aseh, when it's involved the notion of karet meaning the Torah used the term that soul shall be cut off. So what is the mechamer and why mechamer is different? Mechamer meaning someone asks someone to lead the animal. How you do that? You either go before or behind the animal, and therefore you crossing 4 cubits in a public domain. So here it's different. Why it's different? Because it's not involved karet, it's not involved skila, it's only isur lav. It's only, the Torah said you should not do that. So the Maharitz Chayut explained based on the Shita Mekubetzet, who said that the Gemara tells us in Tractate Yevamot page 62, a person is commanded to honor his father, to listen to the word of his father. So the Gemara said, Be'oseh ma'aseh amcha. So if the father tells him to violate Torah law, ein din kibud, you don't need to honor parents. Meaning, if the father tells the son, kill, obviously, steal, he doesn't need to listen to him. In the same manner, if the father tells the son, violate Shabbat, so you don't have to listen to him. So the Gemara said, here, if you talk about mechamer, meaning someone who lead the animal either before or behind the animal, vafilu achel lo dachi. Why? Because it's come from the other way around. Ela de kaimelan de ate ase vedachei lo tase ligmar mehacha de lo lidchei. Okay. The idea is Ani Hashem, the Lord God, is above all of that. Now, for those who came in new to this subject, I'd like to give you just a short overview. What is this all about? We'll start with the point of departure of the Mishnah. The Mishnah tells us that there are 15 categories of women that they are potrot, they exempt their tzarot, their rivals, the co-wife, etc. And how do we derive from that? We say that it's a conflict. In one hand, the Torah said that is a list in the book of Leviticus chapter 18 of all the abomination, all the illicit relations. Go from the strong blood relatives, such as a person and his daughter, a person with his sister, etc. They go from that to Isurei Chitun, meaning a person with his daughter-in-law, meaning she became part of his family, not a blood, but part of his family because of her married to his son, or mother-in-law, etc. And then you go to the further on, that the brother, surviving brother, that was born after the other brother passed. Now, how you derive it? It's called Achot Isha, from the sister of the wife. Now, the thing is, you have here a conflict, because in one hand the Torah said, all of this is prohibited. On the other hand, the Torah tells us in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 25, is a mitzvah for the surviving brother to act in a Levirate marriage and marry the wife of the deceased, of his brother. So you see here conflicted sources. So we derive from the Achot Isha, the sister of the wife. The Torah said, Lot tikach, you shall not take. So the word aleha looks meyutar, superfluous. So we said, bimkom mitzvah lo tikach. So that's basically binyan av lekol Torah. You derive from that the entire Torah. So you have in one hand the mitzvah of ייבום. On the other hand, you have the mitzvah of the arayot, negative. So he said, this is the concept here. So we try to learn from that as a analogy to the subject of Shabbat. How? Because in Shabbat, you see, in one hand, the Torah said, honor parents. On the other hand, the Torah said, you should not violate Shabbat. And we derive from that, if the father tells you to violate Shabbat, you don't listen to him. So what is this? You see here a positive commandment honoring parents. You see a negative commandment not to violate Shabbat. And you see the positive override the negative. Right? So try to bring it to our comparison. So as we said, Vechi Teima. If you said that we are speaking here about the love of mechamer, the love of riding that animal on Shabbat, Shanei lavei de Shabbat de chamire. You cannot compare it, because when it's come to Shabbat, the Gemarrah in Eruvin 69 said that someone who violated Shabbat is the same as worship idols. So it means that Rashi explained it's like act of heresy. He rejected Hashem, who created the world in 6 days, and then he rested on Shabbat. So therefore, if we have the prohibition of Shabbat, it's not override for the positive commandment. So he said, Veha tana be'al makai velo kaparich. So we do not learn it, so not the other way around. So in general, we should know, and I'm saying it in this general statement because we're going to learn other examples. What we have here is the discussions. We do not have the final halacha yet here. But when a person have these type of questions or problems, he or she should ask a prominent posek, prominent rabbi, before making rulings. It's just, we are in a point of discussion yet. The Tanya. Yachol amar lo aviv hi tameh. So imagine a person, he is a kohen, and Rashi said that here as a kohen, as you know, he is prohibited from entering the cemetery. His father said, go and pick up either, let's say, someone left in a cemetery a baggage or purse or whatever it is. Go inside the cemetery and pick it up. Now let's think together. What's going on here? In one hand, you have the mitzvah of what? Honoring father. The father asks you to go inside the cemetery and pick up a property. On the other hand, you are the kohen and you are prohibited from entering the cemetery. What do you do? So they said, או שאמר לו אל תחזיר, meaning the father said to him, do not return a lost item. So you have in one hand, kibud av, the oraita, the honoring father, is a biblical commandment. Now, the idea is, Rashi said, if the father derived benefit, derived joy from that, is one category. If it's not, the father did not derive anything from that, it's not part of that. So for example, if he said, Basheli, cook for me, slaughter for me, so that's a positive commandment that overrides negative commandment. Now, if you have here the father ask him to become contaminated by entering the cemetery in order to return a lost item, so the great sage Baruch Ber, you see it in a book called Birkat Shmuel, he explained, if you tell him, do not return it, why he doesn't want his son to return an item? Because he said, I need you to serve me now. I need you, I'm on a wheelchair, or I'm here, whatever it is, I get bored, I want you to serve me now. And instead of taking this lost item and return to this guy, I don't want you to do that. I want you to be here, help feeding me, or take me out with my wheelchair around the facility, right? So you have a conflict. You want to return the lost item, which is a mitzvah, and you want to honor the father. So the whole ma'alach here, that's the way the Baruch Ber explains. So if you have here the idea that the father derived benefit from that, derived joy from that, because he asked you to do something to serve him, that's Yachol Ishmalo, you may say that the mitzvah of honoring father override the mitzvah of lenefesh lo yitama, that the Kohanim are prohibited from contaminated from attending the cemetery. Or there is a negative commandment, lo tuchal להתעלם. When you see a lost item, you cannot ignore it. You have to return the lost item to a person who lost it. So the Talmud lomar, the Torah tells us in Leviticus chapter 19, ish imo ve'aviv tirau, a person shall revere his father and his mother, ve'ed shabtotai tishmoru, and you shall observe my Shabbat, ani Hashem. Why you need the word, I am the Lord your God at the end? We all know that God is God. The answer is, kulchem chayavim bichvodi, meaning all of you are obligated to my, meaning God, honor. So this is a proof that the honor of Hashem, right, will not override for honoring parents. So honoring Hashem is observing the Shabbat. Honoring a parents is violating Shabbat. You honoring Hashem override honoring parents. Okay? So what do you derive from that? The Tanah here we derive the idea that the prohibitions of Shabbat, the biblical commandments that prohibited us from doing certain work on Shabbat, is not override for the positive mitzvah of honoring father, right, or mother. So the whole idea that we say that Shabbat is chamur, is more stringent, we refute that point, because here we prove that the mitzvah of honoring parents does not override Shabbat. It applies specifically in the violation of mechamer, leading the animal, which is some mitzvah, negative commandment, that not involved with karet or skila. So therefore, here the Gemara accepted that proof, and now we go back to the original assumption that this drasha, this exegesis, teaches us that the mitzvah of honoring parents does not override Shabbat in an avenue of, for example, if it's involved with slaughtering, cooking, that there is under the correct punishment. So therefore, usually positive commandment override negative commandment, that it's involved with correct. But back to our original subject, we said when it's come to Yevamah, the word aleha, it teaches us that the sister of his wife or other one cannot act in a Levirate marriage, because otherwise we may say, hey, you have this mitzvah in Deuteronomy 25 of ייבום, that should override all this list of abomination of Arayot. So now the Gemara want to elaborate on that and explain the concept. Ela, if the father asks his son to slaughter or cook for him on Shabbat, this is type of work that involve of karet punishment, karet meaning that soul shall be cut off. So he said that cannot juxtapose, cannot compare to the word aleha that we are using for the ייבום. Why? Mishum de'ika lemifrach, because we can refute it by saying ma le'alan, what you learn in a mitzvah if of the honoring father, what?
Malanach.
Malanach, thank you.
Yep.
You see the mitzvah of honoring father when the father asks to slaughter, to cook for someone on Shabbat, sheken echsher mitzvah, because this is a preparation for mitzvah of honoring one parent, since the son is not actually feeding or clothing his father at that time. So here you think the only way for fulfilling the mitzvah is by doing correct. Now here in ייבום, in Levirate marriage is not the only way. Why? Because remember, the option is, if it's no ייבום, what do? You do וחליצה. Now we go to two different avenues. One, we go first by the Rashi. So Rashi tells us here, that you have mitzvat aseh, a positive commandment, versus negative commandment with the karet. So you have hava amina. You may think that in all the Torah, positive commandment override negative, and honoring father is different. So the only way to fulfill the mitzvah of honoring father is toward the love, toward the prohibition. So the Torah said, don't listen to him when it's come to ייבום. So why? Because it's an option of וחליצה. So here, this is the way Rashi said. Tosfot have three questions. He challenged that. And others. How first you tell me that prohibited all of these chayavei kritot, all of these prohibited violation that involve with cohabitions, it's the option to fulfill mitzvat ייבום. Because, let's face it, any type of category of women that cannot reach the point of ייבום, you mean to say that then automatically they go for וחליצה? Is that correct? Second one.
So you're saying if they don't qualify for ייבום, then you have to do וחליצה?
That's the question Tosfot asked. He also go further to say that you mean to say that וחליצה is total substitute for ייבום? That's the way you treat it? The Gemara said, we're going to study it on page 21, that וחליצה במקום ייבום לאו מצווה היא. If you do וחליצה instead of ייבום, you do not fulfill the mitzvah, which means acting of וחליצה, of taking off the shoe, it's in a way nothing to do with fulfilling the mitzvah of ייבום. It's not equivalent. That's what the Gemara said in page 21. So the third question is, you mean to say when you talk about honoring parents, that that's not override Shabbat? that you learn it from the notion that positive commandment override a negative commandment that involved with karet. So the whole idea is only you do that when you fulfill the mitzvah. In short, you see here that there is two avenues that positive commandment override a negative one. One, if that act, that notion force to be in violation, which means you cannot do it otherwise, or you cannot exempt yourself without making this transgression. Meaning, the father did not derive joy from that action. It's just which we call hechsher mitzvah, which means the preparation for the mitzvah. So here there is a lot of elaboration of the mefarshim, etc. What does that mean? The difference between exemption or fulfillment of mitzvah. Ela salka da'ata chamina. So now we bring another source, which is again positive commandment that override a prohibition that involve with karet. So therefore the pasuk, the word alea in ייבום, how you compare it? Ela salka da'ata chamina teitei mi binyan bet hamikdash. The Torah said in the book of Exodus chapter 25, ve'asu li mikdash, they should build for me a sanctuary, which means that there are positive commandments that override even a prohibition that involve with karet. The Tanya, we learn in the Braita, Yachol yehe binyan bet hamikdash doche Shabbat. You may think that the building of the temple overrides Shabbat. Talmud lomar, so we derive from that book of Leviticus chapter 19, Ed Shabtotai tishmoru umikdashi tirau. You shall observe my Shabbat, and you shall revere and awe my temple. I am your Lord your God. Kulchem chayavim bechvodi, meaning all of you obligated to my honor. Meaning even the Beit HaMikdash, even the Holy Temple, is subjugated to the honor of God. So it is not in God's honor that observing Shabbat override the mitzvah of building the Beit HaMikdash. So meaning this is Gemara in Tractate Shevuot, page 15. They said the whole purpose of building the temple is to increase the honor of the divine providence, the honor of heaven, and fulfill the mitzvot by doing so. But that should not come toward violation. Because if it's come for violation, you have here a defect, an issue of, it's in a way, it's like you're fulfilling the mitzvah by, this is the first, we're getting close to Sukkot. You see Arbat Aminim, you don't have. It's the first day of Sukkot. You see Arbat Aminim, you pick it up and you make a bracha, right? So in one hand you feel, oh, I make a bracha over 4 species, but it has to be yours. And if it's not yours, right? So the same here, you're building the temple, but you cannot build it toward violations. I remember when I was a kid, my father had a dream. He wanted to build a mikveh. And that time his neighborhood was very non-religious. Now it's a very religious neighborhood.
Like father, like son.
So as a guy came out of nowhere, he said that he retired. He came from Germany and he wants to give the money. He heard that the rabbi needs the money for mikveh, here's the money. So I remember Dad said to him, sit with him and said, where is the money from? So the guy said, I admit it, I have, in those days it used to have East Germany, remember? East and West Germany. So people used to have hotels with casinos. So he owns many casinos. So he said to Dad, I sold my casinos and I have the money and I want to contribute to the mikveh. Almost like laundering money. It's legally is okay because it's his money, right?
Right.
But halachically is a problem.
Right.
So my father rejected it, and my father was desperately need the money for mikveh. So then he came back. It was unbelievable, and he said, "How about if you leave all the bathrooms you need, because it's a large neighborhood, you want to build a large mikveh, so you need many bathrooms, shower rooms and bathrooms. How about if you take some of the money and you build all the bathrooms?" And Dad refused to take money from him. Anyway.
It's a quick question. You said when you have the phrase Ani Hashem Elokecha, and there that means that mitzvah applies to everyone. I think you mentioned that earlier, right? When you said if the phrase Ani Hashem Elokecha is at the end of the
Ani Hashem.
Okay.
I am the Lord your God.
Right. And that then implies that the mitzvah that it follows that it's talking about applies to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Meaning you and your parents are obligated to honor me.
Right. Now, is that any time that phrase appears after a mitzvah in Torah that we assume that then applies to everyone? If it says if it ends with Ani Hashem,
each one is to that.
But each
category.
one you got to look at each case individually.
Any time that you use the word Ani Hashem, it has special significance. It's not just God need to tell us that I am God.
Right. That's what I'm saying. So, and so generally it would imply that mitzvah applies to everyone, not
everyone.
Just.
Yeah.
And generally in that situation we're talking about men and women. Then it would apply to, or just all men, or does it depend?
Everyone.
Everyone. So okay.
My love, the building of Beit HaMikdash, beboneh vesoter. We have category of building that it's called a builder, boneh, and one is demolished. That's a type of melacha and Shabbat that the person deserve karet. Tama, why we say that building the temple override that? The Chatav Rachmana et Shabtotai Tishmoru. We said you should observe my Shabbat, and then they said Umikdashi Tirau Ani Hashem, and revered my sanctuary, I am the Lord. So you see here Shabbat and Beit HaMikdash in one line. Ha-la-vachi without dachi, which means that if you don't have it in one line, you may think that building the Beit HaMikdash override the prohibition of doing work on Shabbat. Even it's a negative commandment that not involved with karet. So we compare that to the word alea. That alea, what does that mean? Again, to our original subject, that the mitzvah of ייבום, it's not apply in a case that the Yevamah is erva, which means is one of those categories that we consider abomination. Otherwise, we said that this mitzvah of ייבום, of levirate marriage, override the isur arayot, the abomination of relation within that 15 categories, right? So the Gemara rejected and said, "Lo, this Braita speaking about building the Beit HaMikdash, it's not speaking about one who build or demolish. You know what it speaks about? Lav di mechamer." Back to that, you remember lading animal?
Mm-hmm.
That it's a negative commandment that not involved with karet. So if that's the case, the reason that is not override the prohibition, we have here, you remember, the same way as we said in the tzitzit, you may think that Shabbat we carry more stringencies, because you don't say that the Shabbat is different, that they have more stringencies. The Tanya. Remember what we said, and the father asked the son to pick up a lost item from the cemetery. Remember that? We just learned it. Talmud lomar ish imo ve'aviv tirau kulchem chayavim bechvodi. So therefore, that it's not the honor of God that observing of Shabbat override for honoring parents. So therefore, this proof show that we're not dealing with melechet mechamer. Ela, you have to say that it speaks about melachot of boneh vesoter, builder and demolished, mishum deika lemifrach malalan sheken hechsher mitzvah, which means that you cannot build the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, on Shabbat without doing work on Shabbat. Versus when it's come to Levirate marriage, we have an option. Remember the option is the וחליצה. So since, that's by the way the Rashi's avenue, he says that since when we're building the Beit HaMikdash involved in building and demolishing on Shabbat, that's the only way to fulfill the mitzvah. So therefore, when you learn other mitzvot, they are override a negative commandment that involved with karet. Now, Tosfot disagreed, and he said that the issue is lav de mechamer, and the Gemara challenged that, and he said hechsher mitzvah. When we come to the preparation for mitzvah, Tei proclaim mehatam, you should derive it from, you should revere your parents, which means that the mitzvah of honoring parents will not override Shabbat. So we said, now we learn that the word alea in ייבום will teach us that it's not applied toward the sister of his wife. So we can learn from that the mitzvah of building the Beit HaMikdash override the mitzvah of ייבום, that it's a negative commandment of arayot. So the Gemara said enachenami. So they said yes, it's indeed so, which means that the Beit HaMikdash, building of the temple, would not override Shabbat. And who said ve'et shabtotai tishmoru mikdashi tirau lama li. Why I need this line that you should observe Shabbat and revere my temple? So he said, mibayla lichdetanya. We learn it from the following brayta. Since the Torah commanded us for Morah Mikdash to revere the temple, yachol yityare adam mikdash. You may think that the person should have a revere for the building, which means the same way as he's serving Hashem, should serve the building. You see, people does that in other faith group. Talmud lomar, ed shabtotai tishmoru ve'et mikdashi tirau. The Torah said, you should observe the Shabbat and you should revere my temple. Ne'emra shmira b'Shabbat ve'ne'emra shmora b'mikdash. The term keeping is stated with regard to Shabbat, and the term reverence is stated in regard to the temple. Ma shmira amura b'Shabbat. Just in the case of keeping the stated with regard to Shabbat. 6b, lo mishabbat ata mityare. You not revere Shabbat itself, as reverence is not mentioned in that context, because you don't fear Shabbat, you don't revere Shabbat. Ela mimishi zhira la Shabbat. From the Lord your God warn us to observe Shabbat. So Tosfot tells us here, he said, you don't have any hava amina, any thought that a person needs to revere his father or his mother by bow down to them. That's not what we meant. Tosfot said, גבי אביו לא הוצרך לומר כן, דפשיטה שלא ישתחווה לו לשם אלוקות, that the person should not bow down to worship his father, right? So you may think that the person need to bow down to בית המקדש, אבל בית המקדש יצריך משום דעה ודבר שבקדושה. Okay, so you may think that you need to bow down to the building, God forbid. אינמי גבי אביו שייך מורה, שלא יכעיסנו, that you have the fear, the reverence, that you not make him angry. אבל במקדש אני יכול למצוא לה בדוחה, כמו שפרש הולך סדר. גמרא said, אף מורה במקדש, לא ממקדש אתה מתיירא, אלא ממי שהזהיר על המקדש. You revere the one who warned us, which is God. ואיזו היא מורה מקדש. Remember the end of the משניות in Tractate ברכות? לא ייכנס אדם בהר הבית, person should not enter the holy temple mount, במקלו, בנעלו, בפונדתו, באבק של רגליו, you not enter with his staff, his shoes, his money belt, or even dust on his feet. ולא יעשינו כפנדריה, not making go through like a shortcut, using the temple as a shortcut, ורקיקה מקל וחומר. And for sure not spit, right, מקל וחומר, obviously. So because we learn, they said in the book of Esther chapter 4, כי אין לבוא אל שער המלך בלבוש שק. She said to Mordechai, you cannot enter the gate of the king while you're wearing sackcloth. So if that it's something that it's inappropriate for human king, how much so that it's inappropriate, Rashi said, to spit in the place of the Holy of Holies. ואין לי אלא בזמן שבית המקדש קיים. That applies specifically when the temple was in existence. בזמן שאין בית המקדש קיים מניין. How do you know that you have to have a fear, a reverence in that place? תלמוד לומר, עד שבתותיי תשמורו ומקדשי תיראו. You should observe my Shabbat, you should revere my temple. Which means that the Torah put the mitzvah of observing Shabbat the same line with revering the temple in order to compare both. מה השמירה אמורה בשבת לעולם? The same way as observing that it's come to Shabbat, it's forever. אף מורה האמורה במקדש לעולם, even not in a time the temple was in existence. So now we back to our question. When it's come to ייבום, the Torah said the word alea, which means the sister of the wife. You don't do ייבום in a situation that you have erva. So you see, עשה לא תעשה, עשה override לא תעשה, positive override negative. So you don't have a clear answer yet. So now we back to the original problem, the original question, what we said. Again, let's refresh our memory. We have a Mishnah that speaks about 15 categories of women that exempt, and we ask a question, what's the source for that? And we said that the source is the sister of the wife. The Torah said, lo tikach, you should not take. And the word alea, it looks miyutar, is superfluous. So we said, bimkom mitzvah lo tikach. We ask a question that this is binyan av lekol Torah, that you can derive from that the entire Torah. This, you have in one hand the law of ייבום. On the other hand, you have the law of arayot. So that's considering lav sheyesh bo karet. So why we need a special pasuk that is prohibited? So they said, Ela sal kadata chamina teite me'avara. You may say that you derive from the idea of the prohibition to do what? To kindling on Shabbat. Which is, the Tana de Rabbi Ishmael, we learn in the book of Shmot, Exodus chapter 35, Lo teva'aru esh bechol moshvoteichem. You shall no kindling fire throughout your habitations on the Shabbat. Ma Talmud lomar. Torah already said you shall not do any type of work. And burning fire is part of doing work. Ma Talmud lomar. What this line come to teach us? I Rabbi Yossi lelav. If, according to Rabbi Yossi, it's come to teach us that this work of lightning, it's not in a regular one, but so here, Rabbi Natan lechalek. So let's explain it, just the very basic concept. What is lechalek? Lechalek meaning, if a person planted a seed, zorea, if he's zorea, and he is not aware, lo yada, he wasn't aware that he is in violation of Shabbat. So that's considering he'elem echad, that he did one thing and he wasn't aware. Now, basically, it means that if beside of planting a seed, it was other things. For example, you water it. For example, you did many other melachot that involve with that. It's called all considering one category. That's called lechalek. If you talk about havara, which means that each type of work require a separate chatat for itself. Meaning, in that sense, lechalek is the idea that it's not love. It's not just one time you violated something, but each and every type of work you are in violation. So Rashi said one way. Let's start with Rashi. Rashi said that Torah tells us, "Lo ta'asu kol melacha." You should not do any type of work. So since you not should do that for kol, that applied to what? Only if someone did all type of work, which is he planted the seed and it was a dim, it was witnesses, it was atra'ah, they warn him, right? So therefore, each type of av melacha, lo tevaru, each one of them, skila bifnei atzmo, independent skila. That's the way Rashi said. The Tanya, one second, avara lechalek yatsa. That we learn, Avraham, so lelav yatsa. We said that the kindling was singled out from the general category of prohibition labors and written explicitly to teach us that it's unlike other prohibition labors, that it's a regular prohibition which does not entail the punishment of skila. Divrei Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Natan, omer lechalek, which means that each of them it's an independent prohibition. V'amar Avat Tana moshavot kashale. Why the Torah used the word bechol moshvoteichem in any place? Why the habitations? So moshavot, what is moshavot? Moshavot מה תלמוד לומר? מקדי שבת חובת הגופי, because Shabbat, his obligation applies to individual himself and it's not for the external object. וחובת הגוף נוהגת בין בארץ בין בחוץ לארץ, meaning that this prohibition of Shabbat, no matter where you live, מושבת כתב רחמן על עמלי. So now you see an example. You live in Israel, you live in Haifa, right? So for apple you said Borei Priyaetz. If you live in Florida, you said for apple Borei Priyaetz, right? Now, versus certain mitzvot like Ola, like diverse kind, Kilaim, like giving a tithe, Masrot, that this depend on the karka, it's not applied outside of Eretz Israel. So here we differentiate between chovat haguf, obligations upon person's body, versus obligation that depend upon the location, which is specifically for Eretz Israel. So the two concept is either by grasping all different categories and you put them together in one entity, or you said each of them is a separate one. משום רבי ישמעאל אמר תלמיד אחד לפי שנאמר וכי יהיה באיש חטא משפט מוות ואומת, which is in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 21 that it's a mitzvah aseh, it's a positive commandment for the bedinim to execute it, those who deserve it. שומע אני בין בחול בין בשבת, meaning we are here speaking about violation that involve in sreifa. So you may say that this fulfillment of that obligation, the bedding have to do it on Shabbat. Umani mekayem mechalelei amot yumat. You mean to say that you should execute it on Shabbat? So they said bishar melachot chutz mitat bedin o eno ela mitat bedin. Umani mekayem veumat. What does that mean? The Torah said you should execute it bachol velo b'Shabbat, during the week, and not on Shabbat. O eno ela afilu b'Shabbat. Talmud lomar, we derive lo tevaru esh bechol moshvoteichem. That's a obligation upon a person's body. וללן אומר והיו לכם לחוקת משפט לדורותיכם בכל מושבותיכם. מה מושבות האמור כאן בבית דין, אף מושבות האמורים כאן בבית דין. ואמר רחמנא לא תבערו. So here you see that even Bet Din cannot kindling on Shabbat. So what we see so far, good morning. We see so far that we need a source, makor, that if you have a positive commandment, that it's override negative commandment, that it's involved with karet. For example, we have the achot isha, alea, right, that it's applied to, that's not applied to ייבום. Because you have the mitzvah aseh, the positive commandment of Yevamah yavo alea. And you need to have a pasuk that it's not so. מה אליו רבי נתן, היא דאמר לחלק יצא, ותמה, the reason for that, it's here. You have in one hand, the beit din have the obligation to execute it. But you ask a question, can a beit din does that on Shabbat? You have in one hand, biblical mitzvah for the beit din to do it. Vehumat, to do it, right? On the other, so that you derive from lo tevaru, because mita it's aseh, it's a positive. Mita it's lo tevaru, it's one thing. And then you have aseh de Shabbat, which is love that involved with karet. So it means that here is different. Here you have a special din, and therefore, when you have in comparison the situation of Levirate marriage with Yevamah, that involved with positive commandment, that's override negative commandment that you have correct. So I thought that in every case of erva, they apply to ייבום. So the Braita come and teach us that it's not so. דכתב רחמנא לא תבערו, הלבחי דחי. So the Gemara said, לא. רבי יוסי. תבע רבי יוסי, אמר רבי יוסי עברה אליו יצא עברה, I'm just reading and then we explain. עברה דבית דין הוא, דבית דין, בישול פתילה. ואמר רב ששי, מה לי בישול פתילה? מה לי בישול סמנים? So, if you think about the beit din, the beit din, one hand, not allowed to do ino yadin. What is ino yadin? So, in Judaism, the beit din that does, again, we don't talk about action, we talk about theoretically. The beit din that executed, they're not acting as a Hammurabi code of vengeful. We don't do that. What we do is, we fulfill the mitzvah, bror lo mita yafa. Do it in a way that you fulfill the obligation. So therefore you should not wait, you should not postpone. If you deserve it, you do it. Now, one of the mitot is sreifa. How you do sreifa? So basically you put in his mouth that item and offer it, and in order to make this offeret, it's bishul. And bishul is prohibited on Shabbat. That's melacha that involved with karet. So what do you see here? That the maskana, the conclusion, when you have the lo tevaru, it's lo taseh. You have a question if it's lelav or lechalek, and you have bechol moshvotechem that involved with chilul Shabbat. That this is mitzvah of הוצאה להורג, you have לא תבערו. אמר רב שמעון בר אשי הייתה לא משום דעת יעשה ודחי לא תעשה, אלא משום דמייטי מקל וחומר. ואחרי כמה, מה אני מקיים? בתורה said in שמות, chapter 31, מחל עליה מות יומת 1, ובליל שבת, shall be מות יומת, should die, משאר מלאכות חוץ ממיתת בית דין. All the others applies, but not in the beit din, which means all the ראיה, all the proof is based on we have in Hava Amina. We may think that they need to do it, execute it on Shabbat, because the Torah said Ve'umat, then we have Lo Ta'aseh, which is Lav Sheyesh Bo Karet. So you see, apparently, soon you see the rejection, but apparently it appears that Aseh, the positive commandment, override Lo Ta'aseh. So the Gemara objected it. They said Aseh is Ve'umat. That cannot override Shabbat. Why? Because they said, Aval Mitat Bedin Dachya Shabbat, Kal Vachomer. How? Page 7, Uma Avodah. So what happened in the temple service? That is this Shehi Chamura V'docha Shabbat. What does that mean? You have Shabbat. In Shabbat, you have the Korbanot. So, wait a second. When involved in Korbanot, it's type of work. How come that allow on Shabbat? You see here that Korban Tmidim, Korban Musafin, right, Elliot? All these Korbanot, you do it Shabbat nidchet mipnei avodah, that you have the avodah at Beit HaMikdash, even in Shabbos. So here you come to idea of retzicha, which means executing of the one who deserved mitat bedin. The Torah said, שנאמר דוחה אותה, שנאמר מאם מזבחי תיקחנו למות. What does that mean? שבת שנבחן בפני עבודה, אינו דין שדרציחה דוחה אותה. Imagine a situation. You have a Kohen, and he basically deserves execution. But he is about to perform a korban tamid, a daily offering. So he come and said, hey, if I'm not doing that, nobody else will do it. I'm the only Kohen here to do the korban tamid. So the Torah come and tell us in the book of Shemot, chapter 21, that no, that me'im mizbechi, you have to take him even from my altar, that he may die. So what do you derive from that? You say the concept of vehumat, it's more important than the korbanot, which this is the order. And forgive me, but that's the order here. The first one is the retzicha, that it's the most important part, it's mitat bedin. And then you have the second, which is avodat hamikdash, the walking in the temple. And then you have the third one, which is the Shabbat. Here in 240 said, if you have a situation that one father or mother was instructed, meaning a son or daughter instructed by a father or mother to transgress a mitzvah of the Torah, whether it was a positive or a prohibition, even a decree of the sages, he must ignore it. You have no heed to that, because God said, my honor override parents. As much as God commanded us to honor parents, there are limitations. Also, the Rambam tells us in L'chot Beit HaBchira, the building of the temple does not override the festival, which are termed Shabbat. That's the way Rashi tells, and all more so, that is not override Shabbat itself. We talk about a reverence of the temple. So the Rambam said in L'chot Beit HaBchira, chapter 7, there is a positive mitzvah to review the temple. So reviewing the temple entail not entering even the temple mount with one's walking with a stick, with pouch, with shoes on his feet, etc. We derive from that also using as a transpassing place, which means we cannot use even nowadays a synagogue to transpass, to do a shortcut to others. Mm-hmm. We talk about mitat bedin b'Shabbat. This is the question you ask me. This is the Rambam, Ilchot Sanhedrin, chapter 11. A court may not administer any bodily punishment on Shabbat or festival, neither capital punishment or any other malkot. So capital cases are not tried on the eve of Shabbat or at the festival, etc. And basically what we derive from all of that is the concept when you have two conflicting texts. One is the idea of ייבום, and the other one is the arayot. We still left up without final conclusions in which way one override the other.